I don't think you need to run and follow, passions necessarily. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea, but put the work in, you get good at it, you start being successful, you'll start liking what you do.
All right. So, welcome to the You Are Lawyer podcast. Stephen Weisberg. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited. I don't talk to that many tax attorneys. So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm excited to see what's going on. Would you tell the audience what you do and what your practice is?
So, as you said, I'm a tax attorney. My niche and my expertise is in all IRS controversies. A lot of tax debt issues, whether that's income tax debt, individuals or businesses. I also do a lot of payroll tax debt for businesses. When they're taking money out of their employees' paychecks, they're supposed to be depositing it with the IRS, of course. Sometimes they don't do that. If their cash flow is low and they need to pay vendors, they might not do that. And they'll take the money from their employees' checks and then not give it to the IRS, and they'll use it to pay vendors, which the IRS does not look too kindly upon. And then on top of that, you get hit with what's called the trust fund recovery penalty, and you're personally liable. Even though it's a business payroll debt, you get personally liable for it. So, and then just to kind of circle back to taxpayers that I help with income tax, that a lot of them are self-employed or small business owners. Just because, when you're not W-2 and you don't have the taxes taken right out of your check, people take liberties and they say, oh, I'm not going to pay my estimated payments this quarter. And then you get to the end of the year, or it's April 13th, and you say, oh, I don't have the money. What am I going to do now?
Okay. So, my mind is spinning. I was prepared, but I have all kinds of other questions now.
Yeah.
So, do business owners seek you out intentionally, or is it when the IRS needs help that they reach out to you? They want someone local?
No, it's business owners. They reach out to me, or self-employed or individuals. Ideally, they reach out to me as early as possible once they realize they can't pay the IRS. But a lot of the times it comes down to once the IRS starts reaching out to them, starts sending them letters and notices, and then they get nervous and they need to find someone to help them out. I get a lot of referrals from other attorneys as well, especially bankruptcy attorneys, and then a lot of tax professionals, whether it's tax preparers or CPAs or fractional CFOs. Their expertise is numbers or maybe tax filing, but not so much in terms of working or negotiating with the IRS.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? If the IRS emails you, I'm not trying to write them myself, right? I'm gonna go get an expert. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So
Just to let you know, it won't be an email. Just so your
okay.
listener, it won't be an email. So if you get an email, it's not actually IRS.
I've seen those. They're like, we do not contact you that way. Yeah, we send you an actual
Right.
letter.
Exactly.
Okay, so Stephen, how did you fall into this type of law? Were you like, in my mind, you were an accountant who went to law school, and so you do this?
Yeah, no, it was not that actually. I went to law school. It was 2008. I was here in Detroit, which was not a pleasant time, really, for anyone in the country, but certainly not in Detroit and probably Ohio that much either. Everything was going down the tubes. So anyway, where I was able to find work was in corporate bankruptcy. And we would represent large suppliers, actually, who were going out of business. But those large suppliers had all kinds of different creditors, right? They had mom and pop creditors. They had like small business creditors, but they also had creditors in the big three automakers. We're talking Chrysler, which is Stellantis now, General Motors, and Ford. And this is, multi-million-dollar companies that the suppliers. So, they owe a lot of money to the big three. And for people who don't know a lot about bankruptcy, the big three would have loaned the suppliers money, but it's a secured loan. It's secured by some sort of collateral. So when you're in a bankruptcy situation, those are the creditors that get paid first, the people that have the secured loans. So at the end of the day, I would work on the case for a year, and Ford and Chrysler and GM would get paid in full for all the loans they made and all the money that's owed to them. But then you'd have still a ton of money left over that's owed to like mom and pop and small businesses, that's just unsecured debt. And, they would get paid like 1-2 cents on the dollar. So to make a long story short, I felt good about what I was doing. And to be honest, the car companies are really good to the state of Michigan, Detroit, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin as well. But I didn't feel like I wanted to work for them just to make sure they got their money back. I wanted to see, the difference that I was making on a day-to-day basis, just really see it in the faces of business owners. So I kind of set out to figure out how I was going to do that. And a colleague of mine had a tax controversy practice, so I started working with him. And that's really how I got into it. I kind of just fell into it. I knew what I wanted, and I knew kind of, like I said, the look on the faces of the people that I was helping. But I really just kind of fell into it, and I enjoyed it, and I liked what I was doing. I felt like I was doing good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so you started with the big three, and then you decided to go to the other side and advocate for the smaller guy. So,
Yeah.
what was that like? You decided to be a business owner. Had you run a business before?
No, I had not run a business, so yeah, I kind of talk about this a little bit. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't have any clients, hadn't run a business, so it was a learning process. I don't really have any advice on it. The advice is just like you get thrown your feet to the fire, and you just kind of got to figure it out. And
Yeah. So I think in pictures, so I'm picturing you at a bar with your buddy, like, I just got to help these people. And he's like, well, I have a tax practice. Why don't you come on over?
it
That's
was
pretty
kind of
cool.
like that.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that, to be honest. Yeah, it's someone that I knew for a while, so like I knew ahead of time that he was doing this, and so that was kind of in the back of my mind. It wasn't like I wasn't like shocked, like he's doing this, I should do it. Like I did know that in the back of my mind, and I pursued some other, or not really pursued, but I looked around for some other avenues, and this was really the best way for me to do what I wanted to do. But also, I could work on my own, and I could bring in business. We had some ways of marketing ourselves, and it turned out to be a really good thing.
Yeah, it's true. The learning what you don't know is kind of amazing, right? Because you get out of law school and you're like, I'm an expert at this one small, tiny thing. And then there's so much more stuff you have no idea about. So yeah,
Yeah.
that part is tough. So what is your office like now? It's the W Group. Is that the title?
Yeah, the W Tax Group.
Okay.
Yep.
And how many people work there?
Sure. Yeah, we have 2 attorneys. We have about 4 support staff, and we also do have a tax prep practice here. It's really not what we focus on, but we do have it because we have clients that just need our help. And my expertise is in the controversy and tax debt.
Yeah. Okay, so if I had a tax issue, are you going to court? Is there litigation involved, or is it all virtual, or what?
So there is litigation involved. You do not have to go to court, and even more so since the pandemic. But if you're just in a regular collections case, you're talking to people over the phone. Everything's done over the phone. If you have a revenue officer, I represent clients all over the country. So when they have a revenue officer, I don't have to fly to their state and be there. I can talk to the revenue officer over the phone. If there's appeals processes that are involved, I can work through appeals over the phone. In terms of litigation in tax court, even that can be done over the phone. And so I guess what I'm saying is it can all be done over the phone. You don't really lose anything by not being there. Especially with your client, you can always have Zoom calls. You can always get on the phone with them. If I need to make a trip over there, I certainly will. But I can do what I need to do without being physically present at all times.
Yeah. Okay. Most people only think about taxes once a year, or if you're a business owner, maybe every quarter, if you set them aside and you pay them that way. But
right.
Is this business lucrative? Do you have clients all the time? What's it like?
Yeah. So, people always ask me in, March and April, oh, you must be so busy. Well, no, I'm really not that busy in March and April because when the IRS is cracking down on, tax debt or other controversies, it's really not during March and April because at that point they're focusing on tax season and getting returns filed. So this is really throughout the year, but especially June, July, and then, September, October, and actually January, February. So it's all throughout the year, except during tax season. But yeah, the way that I market myself, I do a lot of work on LinkedIn. I have a lot of good relationships with tax professionals, bankruptcy attorneys, family law attorneys, but then also financial planners, mortgage lenders, and a lot of those relationships turn into clients for me because they have clients that come up with tax debt, especially tax professionals and bankruptcy attorneys that need to be dealt with, and they can't necessarily deal with it on their own because they're doing something else, and they need someone to fix what their clients having a problem with.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about talking to a tax attorney, I don't think about taxes. And so I'm just like, he has work all year. That's
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of fascinating. But I mean, running a business I've been thinking about taxes more than ever before my entire
Yeah.
life, right? If you're just like a W-2 worker,
Right.
you don't consider it. I mean, I may have had like one issue where they didn't take enough taxes, but like,
Yeah. Right.
so outside of being a business owner, like, how do you know you need a tax attorney?
Well, most people who either LLC or just sole proprietor or even an S corp, that all flows to them individually. So, if they're gonna just making up numbers, $20,000 for the year, and they're supposed to be making estimated payments quarterly, and they're supposed to be making their $5,000 payments each quarter, and they don't make them, they're gonna get to, like I said, April 10th, and be like, I don't have the money to pay for this. That's how you know you need a tax attorney. You need to figure out a resolution with the IRS. You need to negotiate a resolution. And then if you're not going to do it at that time, you'll know that you need a tax attorney when the IRS sends you a letter that says, we're going to garnish your wages or levy your bank account if you don't get this thing fixed. That's when you know you need a tax attorney. But like I said earlier, hopefully, you need a tax attorney when you realize I can't pay what I owe. Or if you get a notice that says, hey, we looked at your, information, your income and expenses, et cetera, and we think that you owe X amount, and you're saying you only owe Y amount, then you need someone to step in and help you with that.
Okay. So when I was in law school, they used to always say, like, an attorney who represents himself is a fool.
Yeah.
Is there any chance someone sees this notice and is like, I can handle it? Or should they always reach out to a tax attorney?
Oh, no, they should always reach out to tax attorney,
Okay.
but there are plenty of people that say that, and they're really doing themselves a disservice. I think to some extent, some people think, well, I'll just call the IRS, and I'm sure they'll give me some terms, and I'll be able to pay over time. And to some extent, they are right in that. Look, if you call the IRS under certain circumstances, they might say, yeah, here, we'll give you a certain amount of time. That doesn't mean that's most favorable to you, and that doesn't mean that they're not basically, pulling one over on you, which that's what they're doing. They're trying to get the money as quickly as possible, as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So yeah, you can do it, but you're not going to get the most favorable outcome for you. You might get an outcome that you can't even afford, that you're not going to be able to abide by. You need someone with the expertise. It's the same thing. It's no different. This is what you're dealing with.
Yeah. No, I got it. Okay, so I think you touched on this a little bit, but I want a little bit more detail. Did you know lawyers when you were growing up?
I did. My father was and is a lawyer. He has been a lawyer for, I think, let's see, I think it might be like 45 years, 50 years now. Yeah, it's about 45 years. Anyway, so it's a long time. He was always a lawyer. I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I felt like I had some characteristics that would make me a good lawyer. I was always good at research. I was always thinking about different issues and kind of questioning things. I could argue pretty decently, whether for better or for worse. My uncle was a lawyer too, and he was a family law attorney. I thought maybe I would want to do something like that. But as circumstances would dictate, I said I got done with law school literally 2008. I graduated. The job market was pretty terrible, and things were kind of going to hell in a handbasket, especially here in Detroit. So corporate bankruptcy is what was available, and that's where I started.
Yeah. Okay. So the podcast, a lot of the audience is law students who are trying to figure out what to do, and then young lawyers. So I wanted to bring that up because a lot of times people will shift. Sometimes people will just leave the law, right? They're just like, I'm over it. I couldn't find anything. So I like the fact that you were like, well, corporate bankruptcy. Okay, no, I'll switch to this side. No, I'll go over to that part. So I think that takes some resiliency, right? You weren't just like, oh, the big guys, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that you like created your own thing and then you actually are enjoying it.
Yeah. I mean, there's this whole follow your passion thing. And even in the law, I think there's, you kind of get into law school and maybe get out of law school and you're like, well, I really want to do this type of law. This is kind of like my passion or something that I feel would be good for me. If you want to be a lawyer and you enjoy being a lawyer, like you go into what you can, in terms of the type of law, And sure, if you really still feel like you need to do some other type of law, then you'll figure out a way to do it. But the way that you become quote unquote passionate, I really think is you get better at what you do, you start feeling good about what you do, you become proficient at what you do, and you start becoming passionate about it because you're good at it and you're feeling good about yourself doing it. So I guess my whole point is I don't think you need to run and follow, passions necessarily. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea, but you put the work in, you get good at it, you start being successful, you'll start liking what you do.
Yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction books and they all say that, right? They're like, the dream job is the job that is easy because you have so much practice and competence in it, right?
Right.
It's not like, oh, I have a family, so I'll do family law. Like, that's
Right.
not how,
Right.
that's not how
Right.
it works. So,
Right.
All right, cool. So, Stephen, I just have one last question for you. What
Yeah.
would you say to a young lawyer or law student about what they could do with their law degree?
Well, you could be a lawyer, you could practice law, and I guess this is my personal experience. I mean, I think that if you go to law school, I personally think you should want to practice law. So, and even if you just end up practicing law, and then you go a different way, insurance type of stuff, and then work for one of the insurance companies later, or maybe there's a business opportunity and you can work on starting a business and you have that law degree and it's helpful. But I just do feel like if you go to law school, like don't go to law school being like, oh, I'm just going to do something else later. I would say go to law school if you want to be an attorney and start with that. And then, there's different ways you might be able to go. But I would go to law school if you want to be an attorney. I wouldn't go to law school just because you don't know what you're doing or don't know what you want to do and you'll do something else later. I think go in with the feeling that like, hey, I want to be an attorney. I want to be the best I can. And if something else comes up along the way, then I have a good, base for being productive professional in general and to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because a lot of people go because they either like arguing or they want to be an advocate, and it's like you can do both of those things and not go to law school, right? So if you're not going to actually practice, that's a good point.
For sure. Yeah,
that's a good point. And if you're already in law school, it's not too late. You can still decide to practice, right? Because law school doesn't prepare you to practice; it prepares you to get done with law school. So you got to practice to see if that's the part that you like.
Exactly. Unfortunately, law school, I might get in trouble. It's kind of worthless in terms of, like you said, law school is great and it teaches you how to think and things like that, but it does not help you with building a business, does not help you with building a client base, kind of those real world practical things. So it's good for a few things, but there's a lot more out there that you really need to understand that you're not going to get from law school.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And to everyone that's listening, I appreciate your time and your attention. Stephen, I will talk to you later. See you around social media.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
Yes.